From 1945 to 1991, the USA and the USSR engaged in a military and political standoff known as the Cold War. Today we will be focusing on the end of that time frame, and specifically the dissolution of the Soviet Union. It leads us to today's question: to what extent was the dissolution of the Soviet Union a result of the Cold War? In order to better understand the question, we must break down the events that led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev was named the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, which assumed the role of the Soviet Union, and he inherited a stagnant economy and a frustrated population. To solve this, he brought two new policies into play. The first of which was glasnost. It freed books and libraries, while it also allowed other parties to participate in elections. It gave new freedoms and removed the secret police, essentially repealing all of Stalin's policies. It was seen as a step towards Americanization in the Soviet Union. The second was perestroika. It freed industry, allowing privately owned businesses to exist for the first time. It allowed strikes and encouraged foreign investment, again straying more towards capitalism than communism. However, much to the dismay of Gorbachev, his plans failed. Industry fell 5.6%, agriculture 7.6%, and the national income overall decreased by 6.3%. This sparked revolts in places such as East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria, leading to overthrows of governments in those places. The USSR's last day was December 25, 1991. 14 member states had notified the country that they would be leaving on Christmas of '91. That day, the flag was lowered for the final time, Gorbachev retired, and the great power was gone forever. So why did the USSR collapse? It's not definite, but several reasons exist as to why. First, socially. The luster and pride of winning World War II had worn off on the 40-plus years since the war. The disaster at Chernobyl in 1986 and the Soviet war in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989 had both drained Soviet morale. Additionally, the people of the USSR had great distrust in the news sources, which also led to social anger. Economically, perestroika torpedoed the old system that was barely keeping the nation afloat. As Gorbachev said himself, the old system collapsed before the new system had time to begin. This discrepancy caused a disaster. The failed economy led to social unrest. Militarily, Gorbachev believed in stopping the military fronts, as he pulled troops from Afghanistan in '89 and also from many Eastern Bloc nations, which led those countries to be vulnerable to governmental overthrow and riots, which happened in nearly every location. These places broke away from the USSR and communism, and it drained the nation's influence in Eastern Europe. How did the USA and the Cold War affect the collapse of the Soviet Union, and to what extent did it do so? Ronald Reagan encouraged the idea of the Strategic Defense Initiative in the early 1980s and rejected disarmament, instead wanting an arms race with the USSR, one that encouraged Soviet involvement. However, as the Soviet economy began stagnating, Gorbachev was forced to pull out of the race. Not only was this a blow militarily, but it was also a social problem, as it only helped to demoralize the Soviet people, which led to more unrest, feeding all three of the categories: economic, social, and military. Furthermore, economic philosopher Karl Marx once called war the most unproductive economic activity, but the USSR was in many wars. This was almost certainly a result of the Cold War. The competition between the United States and the USSR, and particularly their contrasting styles of government, dragged a fragile Soviet economy into several wars, such as the Korean War, Vietnam War, and the Soviet War in Afghanistan. The USSR's economy was not made to survive long term, and competition with the United States via the Cold War expedited the collapse. Thus, from this example, it is clear that the Cold War had a hand in the economic and military reasons for the dissolution of the Soviet Union. However, there is a counter-argument, and the question, why wasn't the dissolution of the Soviet Union a result of the Cold War, can also be posed. It can be argued that the dissolution of the Soviet Union, at least economically, was bound to happen as a result of the flawed communist system in the nation. While both the USA and the USSR suffered from military spending, the USSR suffered more. The USA was integrated with the capitalist market and had foreign goods to suffice in tough times. Thus, the economic hardship didn't show up in deficit of consumer goods, and mostly the citizens didn't suffer. In the isolated communist system, when the USSR foolishly spent in military, it directly affected the consumer and left many starving and forced rationing into use. So, it can be also said that from this example, it proves why the collapse of the Soviet Union was a systematic flaw and not a result of the Cold War. It is clear that to a moderate extent, the dissolution of the Soviet Union was the result of the Cold War. While the unhappiness of the Soviet people and the collapse of the communist economy may have been inevitable, it was no doubt helped by the Cold War. The economic situation was bound to fail because of basic principles of isolationism, but it was competition with the United States that forced the USSR into poor spending in military and wartime situations. Additionally, the Cold War exposed the Soviet people to truthful, non-propaganda written newspapers, which helped fuel social unrest, which is one of the most powerful factors leading to the late 80s revolts and the eventual overthrow. The dissolution was probably a sure thing, but the Cold War and the competition with the United States helped speed up the process. Thus, in conclusion, it is apparent that through military and political and economic spectrums, the Cold War had a decent-sized hand in the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Not entirely, but definitely a large contributor to the dissolution.